Here we go. So, I've been studying the Bible lately, I always do, and in it I've been in the book of Ecclesiastes, and in chapter 2, there's this really interesting, like the whole book of Ecclesiastes is really good, especially if you struggle with anything like depression, anxiety, any kind of mental illness or strains like that, because you will find a lot to relate with as you're reading the words of Solomon there. But in it, 2 verse 17 says, I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after the wind. And basically, like that, I mean, he's tried wisdom, he's tried folly, he's tried pursuing pleasure, he's tried like stoicism and keeping himself from stuff. Like he's tried everything and found that it's all worthless. That eventually, the person that's drinking themselves into psoriasis versus the person who keeps themselves completely, like never drinks a sip of alcohol in their whole life, they both die. Maybe not at the same time, but that doesn't really matter because death is still death. And if that's the case, then what's the point? If we're all just all like, if we're all on these discordant roads and we're all just like boom, it's all gonna cross up, it's all just gonna come to a head at an intersection called death, and we're all then gonna have to travel the same path afterwards, then what difference does it make? Does it make any difference if I'm rich and the next guy is poor? Does it make any difference if I am wise and the next person's a fool? Does it make any difference if I am celibate and the next person is lascivious? Does it make any difference if I've had a lot of sex and the next person has had none? Does it matter? And his conclusion, as well as most of ours, is simply, I guess not. I guess it really isn't. Which is interesting because it really gloves up with the idea of what Bertrand Russell, Albert Camus, Friedrich Nietzsche, all these that they wrote about in their atheism of like, listen, if it's true, then everything is meaningless. That none of it matters. Even some of the moderns that are willing to be honest with themselves, of like Richard Dawkins, and with the rise of things like the anti-natalist movement saying that, listen, the earth isn't worth what we're doing to it, that we ought to sterilize ourselves and things like that in order to return the earth back to the way it was before we came along. Like, if it's true, and naturalism is all there is, and nature is all that we have, then none of it matters. Then nothing, that not only does this life not matter, but anything that we could possibly leave behind doesn't matter either. Because you can erect a statue to Peyton Manning in front of Lucas Oil, but you know what? Someone else is going to come along and is going to do better than he did. That doesn't matter what you leave as a legacy. Eventually they are going to forget you existed. And the conversation of who was the greatest is just going to move on without you. And eventually you're not going to be included at all anymore. That no matter what, and it's uncomfortable to think that way, but honestly, I think what we're getting at with this passage is that it's trying to make us realize that if that's you, if that's how you think, that maybe your eyes are actually the most wide open. You don't need necessarily to change how you view the world because you're seeing it rightly. That without Christ, that without God as our comfort, that is exactly how things are. Maybe you're the one that's right, and the ones that go around with the optimistic glass half full, maybe they're the ones that are wrong. Maybe the ones that are trying to backfill into their life a meaningless, transient, purposeful goal of acquiring wealth. Maybe they're the ones that are absurd. Maybe the idea of retirement is stupid. And maybe it's because Christ is the only reason worth living. And maybe it's really true that he is the chiefest comfort in all of existence, and that when you don't have him, there's nothing